on behalf of Takoma Park, the City of Takoma Park, and the Arts and Humanities Commission. This is the 12th year of the Third Thursday series, which was started by Don Berger, who was Takoma Park's first poet laureate. And it's been continuing since 2005. Those poets who are in our series have been selected by a committee of people, and I would like to acknowledge them. In fact, they're all here, I think. Ann Becker, who is the city's second poet laureate, and Meredith Pond, and Mary Beth Hatem. Mary Beth, you're back there. And Madonna LeBlanc, who I'm not, yeah, is she here? No. Okay, and me. My name is Merrill Leffler, by the way. And behind the scenes, very modestly, but who, you see this program that we have. It's all done through Sarah Daines, who, this is not her first job. This is like her second or third. She's the head of community and economic development. And then, of course, this is being recorded, and we have great people doing this work. And these readings will be on YouTube. So all of your friends who could not come tonight, and those friends that you don't know yet, you'll be able to let them know that it's here. Tonight, as you know, we have Indran, and I'm going to say this correctly, I hope, Amirthanayagam, Nancy Naomi Carlson, and Joanne Delaplaine. And Joanne is going to be reading first, and then Nancy, and then Indran. Before we get started, I do want to call your attention to We Are Takoma. This is part of the We Are Takoma series, and if you haven't picked this up, you should. This is the programs in October and November. We've a variety of programs. I'm not going to go through them, but you can take this and see. There's so much going on in this city. I can really sound like a chauvinist for Takoma Park, but it's the literary things that are going on, intellectual lectures, a whole range of different events having to do with the arts that go on in Takoma Park, which is supported by the city. So, Joanne, who has read in our series before, so I've been familiar to some extent with her, with her poems, but I've also been reading them again. And I think, there are many different kinds of pleasures we take out of poetry, right? To me, one of them is surprise. Now, surprise comes in very different ways. It comes in, it comes in the language, first of all. It all begins with language. But it may be theme, it may be, the way a theme is taken on, how much of an interior into that poet's universe, and that's what all the poems do. They give us a kind of way into the universe of that, the way that poet, who that poet is, and the way they use language. But surprise to me is one of those things, and as I say, it comes in very different ways. I think the surprise for me in reading and rereading some of Joanne, and I don't know if I should say Joanne or Rocky, Rocky, okay, I'll say Rocky, is a kind of freshness and exuberance, and her poems are ones that I feel I want to read out loud. So that's why I asked her, are you going to be reading this poem or that poem? And so I was happy to hear, that, not happy to hear, but that I could get to read one of her poems before introducing her. And when I say exuberance, she takes on different kinds of themes, and a horseshoe crab, and penguins, and just and poems about her father, and Nancy has poems about her father, but very different ways. But those poems of affection and deep affection. But this is a poem very different called The Letter O, and this is what I mean by exuberance. I'm not sure I'll read the whole thing, but it'll give you an idea. Oh, your birth month, the full October moon, orange rising behind oaks, or the 15th letter shown by Phoenicians with a dot in the middle, as if eyes. Oh, the mind waking, the mind oscillating just before sleep. Oh, on Oahu, hula dances containing the sun. Oh, the primordial sound, Om, as it begins in the month. So it's this wonderful riff that just takes off and letting the mind and the imagination go. And I think you'll hear that in a number of the poems that Rocky is going to read to us. So please welcome Rocky Delaplaine.
Thank you, Merrill. Thank you, Meredith and Mary Beth and Anne, Madonna, Sarah Danes for organizing this series. And thank you, friends, for coming out to hear poetry tonight. I'm going to be topical. This is Takoma Park, after all, and the times seem to demand it. I've been, since the election, trying to think how we're all going to survive and looking around for role models of resilience. This poem is for a woman who survived 18 years in a Soviet gulag. And it references her first prison, Yaroslavl. It's not me reciting for Yevgenia Semyonovna Ginsburg. Transport train 7 is in motion again, going who knows where, the brigands won't say. In prison I was a stone, now I'm lighter, shifting sand. I press my nose against the boxcar slats and smell onion fields growing. Read the color of the sky, blue, so blue. It's June 1939. We all wear the same gray uniform. Some of us, just out of solitary, haven't spoken for more than 2 years. Now we all talk at once. Zinaida recites her own poems. Sonia says life before Yaroslavl was long ago and never happened anyway. Who am I? Until today, I was Cell 3 North Side. I was once a teacher, journalist, mother, wife. I recite Eugene Onegin, hear sighs. Who knows when you'll need a poem? Guards pound the door, accuse us of hiding books. It's not me reciting poems. It's not God. He was deposed with the czar. It's this boxcar holding 76 women prisoners in its arms. It's the rustle of women lying down on their bunks to remember love. It's the wind seeping through the slats of the train. It's these wheels keeping time to Pushkin. Another role model of resilience was my friend, neighbor, and colleague, scientist Rick Piltz, who blew the whistle on the George W. Bush administration over their tampering with climate science. And for that, he earned the Ridenauer Award. This poem is in the form of a list. Elegy for Rick Piltz. Concerning the fuel cycle, Rick sang, "Pay attention to the back end." Rick drumming long, tapered fingers on the door of his red Honda. "Come on, Karen." Rick blowing the whistle on the Bush administration. "Okay, let's do this thing." Rick listening to Thelonious Monk, K-pop, Tina Marsh, Charlie Hayden. Rick chanting, "Hell no, we won't go," at the Pentagon. Bohemia, Saxony, Rick's ancestral homelands. Rick making sure we knew Lynn was important in his life, even though they never married. Rick saying to Lynn, "Well, there's this woman with long stemmy legs named Karen." Rick from his desk on the sun porch flashing me a peace sign every time he saw me on my bike riding up or down South Chelsea Lane. Rick defending the planet on Al Jazeera, 60 Minutes, Frontline. Rick taking his dog April to Bonnie's dog Mac for April's last goodbye. Rick making sure his daughter Shane watched Rebel Without a Cause because it was her birthright and duty as an American. Rick taking Philip Seymour Hoffman's death personally. Rick's worst fear, being mired in banality. Rick going home to Detroit to see cousins. Rick telling his first wife, Danielle, a therapist, "Feelings are so overrated." Rick reading On the Road and Howl for comfort. Rick black turtleneck hip, Rick short of breath, Rick dying just like that. Rick cremated in his Go Blue t-shirt. Rick's last words, stop bustling, stop chuckling, pay attention to the back end. This is my #MeToo poem, written from the persona of Persephone, who's talking to her mother, the earth goddess Demeter, called Persephone. You turned from me toward an olive tree, one field over, pruning. You were inventing agriculture. I've heard of worse. Mothers that keep the car idling on the curb and run in for a carton of milk. He grabbed me suddenly. The ground parted. It wasn't your doing or mine. It was summertime. He came as a beast with many arms. My ribs felt the knife. I was asleep. I was in a deep dream. I tried to fend him off. I did not choose him. That's a man's myth. Don't believe it. He didn't want me. He wanted my river of forgetting. Laconic this lord, eyes colder than his marble throne. I never assented. That's Zeus's story. Couldn't you hear my screams? Yes, I ate those pomegranate seeds. I chose to live. He came on me like destiny. Stress breaks rock along its fault line. Pressure turns a coal to diamond. Something cold in my heart cracked open. The grim god said, "You'll remember me." I was so young. He smelled metallic, like tungsten. Had a shock of white hair over his right temple, wolf's foam. I was 11 in 1964 when my family moved to Bogota, Colombia, where my father worked as a city planner. Students there were already protesting the US involvement in Vietnam. Bogota, 1964. At the entrance to National University, a light turns red. My father stops the car. I'm in the back seat of a Chevy, squeezed between two brothers. I've never heard of the Vietnam War. Our black license plate identifies us as Americans. A crowd circles. Grown men yell, pick up stones, rock the wild car. Someone lies in front of the wheels. My mother rolls down the window, pleads, but I'm a student here. A young man jumps on the hood. His voice stays the storm, my flood of tears. The road clears. A man thrusts his head inside the window, says, "Be glad your children were here." This is the poem that was printed on the program. I've made a few changes. Living in Bogota opened me in so many ways. I hope you'll hear some of those ways in this poem. And this is a complicated love poem for my father and for the city of Bogota. My father is buried in Bogota. If my father had a lover, it was you, Bogota. I would never have chosen you. I was pulled along with my mother, sisters, brothers, unwilling, sullen. But to enter your gates, Bogota, is to glide on eucalyptus leaves, watch men fall on their knees, hear parrots prattle at dusk, coffee beans, chicle, milk warm from the cow. I wanted anywhere else, yesterday, not this. But he takes us to your cathedral carved inside a salt mine. Everywhere I see emeralds. Africa moves through you to him, to me in your cumbia, your merengue, your mapalé. Your golden lizard gods mock the Spaniards. Condors with clerical white necks soar without flapping their wings. My father wants to change you, Bogota, but I believe in your calamities. Your chickens cruise on top of the bus in painted wooden crates. Call it altitude sickness, he kept going back, hoping to improve your city streets. You had me when you circled our car in clouds. Go ahead, swallow his bones. He was always more yours than ours. Yeats once said, out of the quarrel with others we make rhetoric, out of the quarrel with ourselves poetry. Yet, here's a quarrel poem written for my friend Laura, who lives in Maine. Luminous. I could say betrayal. I could say there is love, and it doesn't touch this sadness. I could say you are rain falling. You are mist rising and icicles forming. I'm a stream, a river moving along the bed of the earth, and we are elementally the same, but formally opposites. I could say language is a gauze on the crusted heart. I could say language is all we have. I could say language is the house we build and tear down. I could say before we had words, our eyes held on. I will say when we got off the phone and I walked outside, the cottontail's ears quivered as the light at dusk shone through them. This is a formal poem. It's a pantoum. It's made of 4-line stanzas. The second and fourth lines of each stanza serve as the first and third line of the next, so you'll hear a lot of repetition. Squall line. I left you for what? A wind? A sound? A hunch? The word redemption kept playing in my mind. A simple prompt with less than simple consequence. A hunch. The word redemption kept my life attuned to slightest difference with less than simple consequence. I walked out of your life. Why? My life attuned to slightest difference? A squall line sped my resolve. I shook. I walked out of your life. Why? An oak limb came crashing to the ground. A squall line shook me, sped my resolve. The world called. It could have been the oak limb crashing to the ground. A round kept repeating in my mind. The world was calling. It could have been a hunch. The word redemption kept repeating as in a round. I left you for what? A wind, a sound. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Someone asked. I am, or at least she haunts me. This poem is told from the point of view of her walking cane. Virginia Woolf's walking cane at the New York Public Library. I should be in Hyde's Park Gate, or Monk's House, or St. Ives, or with Vanessa's grandchildren, who remember us gladly, the strolls we took. There was rhythm in your long stride. We made our own waves. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Our tips clicking down the stairs of your Bloomsbury flat. On our final walk, you raced me to the river Ouse, your pockets bulging with rocks. I was all that floated that day. Someone found me, returned me to Leonard. He kept me until he couldn't, then, like you, set me free. But here I am, in a glass case, the top half of a question mark, still bearing your weight. And I'll read one more. Chincoteague. I refer to the color madder. It's a reddish-orange color made from the madder plant. Chincoteague. Now the sea swallows a madder sun. So much is round. Eleanor's belly still soft from giving birth. Ace's head, fists, eyes, his mouth clamped on her breast, sucking. Waves lap the shore. Here at low tide, below the pier, fiddler crabs dart in and out of holes burrowed in the mud. Their clicks recall typing class, summer, junior year. Fingers pecking keys, our hard, gawky shells. I watch a male whose yellow gold front claw seems useless, something he drags, hauls, until he pauses, raises it like a warning flag, then woos a female, follows her down a hole, backside first, withdrawing his huge claw last, closing the door. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great fun. Yeah, I said before, in saying the obvious, I guess, that poets take us into their own universe, and it's really hard to generalize because anything can become subject of a poem. I think in some of the poems we heard of Rocky's poems, there's this kind of attentiveness to what's going on out there, and a kind of detail and concreteness. Other poets will often be looking in the interior, and the concreteness, in the interior. I don't want to say that, again, I don't want to generalize, but I do want to read this, and there's a reason I'm going to read this for Naomi Carlson, who's going to be reading. It's hard to believe I pulled this book down. This is Nancy's first book from 20 years ago. Two of the publishers are here, Sid Gold and... Okay. Well, here are the comments I wrote then. So this is 20 years ago. King's Highway is freighted with loss, though loss is the poet's route to understanding and acceptance. Poems here reiterate and expand on this theme. At their center, literally and metaphorically, is breath, as in the acute attentiveness to a newborn's giving breath up, to a drowned baby's breath resurfacing, to a starling still formed and looked asleep, to a violin's breath arising from the rosin bow against each string. These are poems attuned to the subtle motions of grief and love that give need to words in the first place. I read that because I think that still stands. Only, Nancy has written many, many more poems and published many poems in magazines. And there is a richness and nuance to the poems that that have been coming. And she's also been translating, won awards for her translations, especially from the French. And it would be another time to talk about how that might have, or might be influencing the kind of work that you're writing. But at the same time, she's still attuned to the kind of calamities that we all experience, whether it's breast cancer, I shouldn't say whether, but breast cancer, parents, in this case, of fathers, Alzheimer's. We all experience, variations of this, and this is one. We're going to hear to some extent the way one poet, Nancy Carlson, is taken these I say calamities, these events in her life, and how they filter their way into poetry and touch us. So Nancy, it's yours.
Thank you, Meryl. Meryl was the first person ever to read a poem I had written. I brought them to him. We lived in graduate housing together, And I wasn't writing, but he was writing and publishing and editing. And it wasn't until 20 years later that I started writing. And I brought the poems to him, and he set the tone for how one should respond to people who share their work, who are beginning. That if he had said, you know, these suck, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, don't quit your day job, that would have really meant something to me to change the course of my writing. But he was encouraging, and he would say things like, well, okay, this is very personal, but you know, you need something that others can relate to. I still remember that. And so I'm forever grateful to Merrill for being the first reader of my work. And it's a delight to be here now in reading it. And thank you to Sarah and to the committee. And thank you to all of you for coming out tonight to hear us. And Indran and Rocky, it's fun to read with friends. So I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote many years ago, and I used to hide the identity of the person. It's a kind of a lust poem for famous people. And I would hide the identity of the person. It was in the mountains of Morelia in Mexico, but in honor of Tom Lux. Everybody fell in love with Tom Lux who knew him. And this one was written from my brief poetry conference in the mountains of Morelia. It's called La Fonda de San Miguel. Somewhere between his fifth and sixth caballito, blue agave tequila smooth as the leaf, when he would talk no more of the Red Sox, their climb uneven and slow toward first place, or those Yankees, those spoilers, or his eldest daughter hiking in Vermont, and he forgot everything but the ridge of his left thumb shot with salt lick, then clean swig of liquor, suck of lime. Somewhere between there and another drag on his Havana, another bite of birria, goat meat sweet in maguey leaves, he offered me a French fry. And leaning close, his blonde hair feathering my cheek, eyelid, lip, confided that the empanada he fed me next was worth more than all his metaphors, more than agave growing on volcano slopes, more than any heart left smoldering home, even if it was his, even if it wasn't, please, no moonflowers drooping near ravines or wayward blooms in muted citrus tones. This time, let there not be vines or scented trees, and let the mariachis fade into arches of stone. No music, no bar, no night. So, guess it's not a secret about breast cancer. Tried to find the humor there. So when Merrill read my first poems, they were about a baby who had died at birth on the day he was born, and that was awful. And then the next awful calamity, but lovely things in between, but the breast cancer experience. And so I'm happy to stand in front of you with my own hair. It's longer. I think I'm just going to grow it longer than it's ever been. But this is a little prose poem called Mannequin Head. I'd been warned, but hadn't believed. Better saved than go to your grave intact. 10 days after the first infusion, I shaved the tingling from my scalp, giving in too fast for locks of love, or to fashion a wig, or even accent a cap to conceal what I'd lost. I hid under hoodies and hats, never getting the hang of scarves and their elegant knots. The scheitel I bought from a Reisterstown shop stayed pinned to a styrofoam head, due to the itch and the feeling I couldn't ditch of a large winged creature perched on my head. By then, every hair on my body had fled down to the very last lash. I rouged my cheeks, drew on some brows, and plumped and colored my lips. Strangers presumed to like my style. I'd repeat my medical tale like a 30-second ad on endless loop. They'd bring up friends who'd been cured, as if sharing a surplus of luck. Slowly, the hair began to fill in, buzz cut straight at first, then curls, thicker and tighter than ever before. Somewhere past the 2-year mark, a new do. No explaining. You just say, thanks. And a little further from the experience, I drive to Alexandria from Silver Spring 3 days a week. There's a lot of driving, sometimes 2 hours getting home. So I think about poems as I drive. Maybe not healthy. So this one is called To the Other Driver at the Two-Way Stop on the Summer Solstice. Giddy with daylight at Fulham and Kent Mill Road, we arrived the same time, though it might have been me by a nose. Now, head to head, waiting for gaps in the traffic snaking between us. Maybe you were lost in the strings of a Beethoven trio you once played, or chewing the juicy thigh of the past, wiping your mouth with a ragged sleeve. I was bent on learning the new math. Breast measured and parsed into quadrants, with high energy waves angled right to the now empty tumor bed lying close to my heart. I was learning to count each second of breath held as if doing the dead man's float. 14 days still to go, 5 in a row so far. I'd had to lie prone with arms overhead, gripping 2 wooden spindles so tight my knuckles bulged, while technicians in blue hospital garb checked and rechecked trajectories. My skin a shade of red that could still bear touch in this rush to fall where you can't depend on 4 o'clock flowers lasting as long, and seconds are often undone by a single stroke. Maybe I shouldn't have glanced at the sun, attracted somehow to my radioactive twin. If you signaled, I didn't see. I was going to opt for left, hoping you'd lead right or straight like a choreographed move on a dance floor. I yielded to you, like evening to dead of night, but this time you let me go. So, actually, I'm going to skip to this one. So, I've never read this with musical accompaniment, and this poem was commissioned by the 6 Degree Singers. My daughter, Rachel, has a community group that's been going for 6 or 7 years, nonprofit. They're 30-somethings. They all get around together and sing and have choir concerts, and they're wonderful. But they commissioned me to write a poem. And the theme of the concert was the muses. And I said, okay, am I being assigned a muse? And she said, no, you could pick any muse you want. So, of course, I felt a strong draw to the muse of tragedy. I'm a dark poet, so this resonated with me. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? And so I thought, well, what I will do with this goddess of tragedy is I'm going to invent a Greek chorus. And this poem is going to be in the voice of the Greek chorus, similar to Rocky and her cane. And here's the Greek chorus is giving their opinion of what's going on. And then I'm going to have you hear how it was set to music and had its world premiere a year ago, I guess. Liz Hannah put it to music. So it's called Greek Chorus Lament for Melpomene. O goddess of tragedy, muse of rhetoric, speech, we, your chorus, are not amused by these masks with downturned lips, made of stiffened linen or other organic strings that dig into skin. Our smiles are stifled. We can barely see or breathe. Kings will never listen. We beseech you to turn away from these minor keys, twin shadows of past and what is to come, and rejoice in the presence of lyres, laurels, celestial spheres. Lay down your cypress crown, your club and hero's leather mask, and wreathe us in your vines and grapes, which we'd gladly exchange for these faces of wood. Thank you. Thank you, Bien. Well, I didn't think what I would do for 3.3 minutes standing up here listening, so note to self is to figure something out. I, I have a few more minutes, I think, and I'm going to switch to translation, just because that's what I'm known as both, so I feel two identities. And I'm going to read one poem by René Char. René Char was a French poet who lived in the 20th century and was considered by the French president as the greatest French poet of the 20th century. He fought in the French resistance, and he had a name, an underground name, and he married a Jewish woman in the 1930s when that was not so socially acceptable. And then he fought against nuclear proliferation during his long life. He was a giant of a man. And he remarried and then died of a heart attack the next year. So he stayed active up to I think, up to his last minute. So this poem is called The Swift. And I'll just read the French two little parts. Le Martinet. Martinet aux ailes trop larges, qui vire et crie sa joie autour de la maison. Tel est le cœur. Il dessèche le tonnerre, il sème dans le ciel serein. S'il touche au sol, il se déchire. Just give you a taste of the French there. And it's called The Swift. Swift, with wings too bold, pumping and shrieking joy as he circles the house, just like the heart. Thunder withers before him. He sows in the placid sky. If he touches ground, he will tear apart. He scorns the swallow, her commonness. What use lace from the tower? In the darkest of hollows, he finds his narrow respite, where none fits better than he. In the long brilliance of summer, he streaks his way in shadows through midnight shutters. No eyes can hold him. His presence is only his shriek. A slender gun is going to bring him down, just like the heart. Thank you. Wondering about that. It's prerogative. Have to ask me afterwards.
Okay, here we are. It's already, we have one more poet here, and this is Indran Amirthanayagam. I hope I haven't messed up my pronunciation, Indran, so I'm going to refer to you as Indran now. You know, when I was reading Indran's poems over this last week or so, I thought of a very small poem, which some of you may know, by Louis Simpson. Now, this is a poem that goes back to the 70s, I think, or the mid-70s, and it's simply called American Poetry. And it's short, so I'll read it. It goes like this. Whatever it is, it must have a stomach that can digest rubber, coal, uranium, moon, poems. Like the shark, it contains a shoe. It must swim for miles through the desert, uttering cries that are almost human. Now, he's writing this during the 70s. I think, not that I would even think to edit Louis Simpson today, but I would. I think I would say if I was right, it's not that a stomach, that it must have a stomach that can digest rubber, coal, and so forth, but that it does digest. That's what American poetry is. By that I mean the language is always, our language, the American language, American English, is always appropriating words, images, allusions, rhythms, subjects, traditions of immigrant cultures. After all, we are an immigrant culture, except for the Indians, and even they, but that was 20,000 years ago. But we're an immigrant culture that many of Americans seem to forget, and that our language is continually in the process of changing. And it's changing because of all these traditions, all these allusions, all this vocabulary that's coming in and altering, you know, so you could read a poem from 50 years ago and it still obviously makes sense, but it might not seem contemporary because our language is always changing. And, you know, and I think in Indran's poems, you know, you're going to hear, I don't know the poems that he will be reading tonight, but you'll hear words and settings that are not common to our everyday language because he's coming from a different culture, even though he's been living here for a long time and is American. You know, some we know, Sri Lanka, you know, settings, Jaffna. How many of you know, did we say Jaffna? How many of you know Jaffna? Yeah, well, it's, you know, some of you will, but it's, you know, it's a capital city in the northern Provence. province of Sri Lanka. I had to look that up. I didn't know. I've known of the name, but I had to look it up. What is common to his poems, are it's a vocabulary, it's diction that Tamil words, and even one of his poems, he uses a word, mahan, which can be translated in various ways, but buddy or friend. So that's eventually, just like other language, immigrant cultures that have come into America, that some of that language has become part of the American language. Yiddish, for example, Italian words, they're part of us. We use them all the time. So saying that, I want to say something about the work, again, from what I have read so far. There are these lines that I really love. It's called The City with Elephants. Not a title that we would think to write of in America, but and I'm taking these lines out of context, as I will the next lines. To write beautiful songs is all I ask. God, to do the right with friends and love a woman and live to 80, have people listen to the story of my trip to America. Now, he does this in numerous poems and that I've read, but it's important to note, for me, that in reading these poems, it's not all that easy, that there is a recognition of the way the world is. So we want to sing beautiful poems, but at bottom, there is a lot of terrible stuff going on, as we know. And has. It's not just now with this new administration. It's been there. A lot of it is coming much more to light, and it's always been there. So there are these lines, again, that I'm taking out of context. There is only man burning and woman burning, here, everywhere, in shallow graves, in deep graves, floating out of salt water, washing down the sands. So we have these two elements that are in these poems, that recognition, but at the same time, and I don't know, are you going to read the poem War? Well, the reason I mention this, a number of, because I just came across this today, a number of writers were asked after the election what they were looking ahead to. And many of the writers, and I didn't read them all, but just glancing through, were just vociferous and taking a stand and feeling the misery that many, at any rate, are experiencing. The beginning of, Indran's poem is called Agenda for the New Year, and it begins like this. Very different than the tone and the subject of these other writers and poets. Let us make peace this new year in our homes, our streets, in our letters, our tweets, our support for refugees, and administration of just laws and rewriting of unjust decrees, and rules in our 50 states and our one globe. Let freedom take up the reins everywhere. So this is a prayer, so to speak, recognizing that we have to work towards those desires. Hope is not enough. Hope is a matter of creating expectation, but working to make that hope realizable. So it's really a pleasure to welcome you to Takoma Park, Indran.
Thank you so much for that very wonderful introduction and for this opportunity to read before you today, to all the organizers, to Sarah. Thank you. And, that little bit of music is actually my latest project, which is a collaboration with some musicians, friends from Haiti, an album of poems I wrote in Creole, and they turned to music. And listening to Nancy's poem Turn to Music, and it's sort of the dream, the secret or not so secret dream and desire of the poet to turn into a chorus, or to turn into a crowd, or to become part of a community, and to be almost get to the point where you don't need to sing your your own song, because your own song has become part of the larger song of the place you live, the people you live with. At least that's been part of my desire. I always thought when I became happy, I would stop writing poetry. But I think when I turned to music, I realized that I could just sit back and dance is what, I mean, Ezra Pound a long time ago wrote about the connection between music and dance and the word, and I think that just finding that connection again is sort of part of the inspiration behind this particular album called Rencontre Doute, which in Creole means the meeting of doubt or meeting in August. So I'm going to try in a few minutes to give you a sense of my poems and this journey, this coming to America, or this being in America, and what America means for me, which is, of course, a big concept, much bigger than in the United States. It includes, I suppose, geographically, this whole continent. And I've had the pleasure and the luck of living in many countries in America, in Peru, in Mexico, in Argentina. For my work, I'm a diplomat representing the United States abroad and part of the U.S. Foreign Service. And that has brought me to meet these different cultures and peoples and make music with them. And that has been a great blessing for me as a poet. I've learned a lot. It was wonderful to hear the poem in French and the translation with René Char. So here, let me give you a few of my poems. You must love. You must love the land when you leave to build your house on the sea. Love what's lost, the mango tree burning in the garden, the curious noose of the familiar coat of arms. Love the ball turning strong, spinning in a dark, faraway land. Love the tongue you'll never again speak, that wrapped you and bled you and dried up some every day on the other side of the sea. For me, that tongue that I lost, Tamil, I spoke as a child, and so when I set off, or with my parents, it wasn't my decision necessarily to leave as a boy, the island of Ceylon, which became Sri Lanka. I left Tamil behind and Sinhalese behind, but I kept English, which was also a maternal language. So I suppose I had two mother languages, and carried on in English. But I kept writing about Sri Lanka from New York, from wherever I landed up. So I was particularly, let me just turn to, some of the great cataclysms of this planet. I mean, they seem to be increasing in number and in speed, but back in 2004, December 26th, Boxing Day, the tsunami, and that when those waves hit the islands of Sri Lanka and other countries, my initial reaction was, how could I write about that? I couldn't understand this island that had suffered a civil war, that was suffering still a civil war, now was being hit by this enormous wave, and I couldn't understand the accumulation of sort of tragedies in one place. And of course now I think we are all touched by these tragedies all over, and we have in the United States have just recently undergone these ecological calamities in Texas and in Florida and in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and so on. Face. Imagine half your face rubbed out, yet you are suited up and walking to the office. How will your mates greet you with heavy hearts, flowers, rosary beads? How shall we greet the orphan boy, the husband whose hand slipped, children and wife swept away? How to greet our New Years and our birthdays? Shall we always light a candle? Do we remember that time erases the shore, grass grows, pains modified? At Hikkaduwa in 1980, I wrote a ditty, a sailor's song about rain in sunny Ceylon. I don't know what Calypsonians would compose about this monstrous wave, this blind hatchet man. Don't know the Baila singer's reply. We are a happy and go people, yet the fisherman's wife knows that her grandfather was eaten by the ocean. Fisher communities have suffered in time, and what's happened now is just another feast for that bloody, sleeping mother lapping up at her island. But what if the ocean were innocent? The tectonic plates innocent? What if God were innocent? I do not know how to walk upon the beach, how to lift corpse after corpse until I am exhausted, how to stop the tears when half my face has been rubbed out. Beyond the railroad tracks and this anesthetic, this calypso come to the last verse. What shall we write in the sand? Where are gravestones incinerated? Whose ashes are these urned and floating through a house throttled by water? Shall we build a memorial some calculated distance from the sea, in a park in the shape of a giant wave, where we can write the names of the dead? Has the wave lost its beauty, considered now obscene? Yet tomorrow we must go to the ocean and refresh ourselves in the sea breeze, down in Hikkaduwa, where it is raining in sunny Ceylon. Tomorrow we must renew our vows at sunrise, at sunset. Let us say the next time the ocean recedes and parrots gawk and flee and restless dogs insist their humans wake up, we will not peer at the revelation of the ocean bed, nor seek photographs. We will run to higher ground, and gather there with our children, with our cats, our dogs, our pigs, with what we've carried in our hands, albums, letters. We will make a circle, kneel, sit, stand in no particular direction, and pray, and be silent, and open our lungs, and shout thanks to our gods, thanks to our dogs. I mentioned the Civil War earlier. That took place. I mean, it sort of ended in a very abrupt way, in a sense. I mean, abrupt in the sense of the carpet bombing that lasted several days and nights, and the killing of the guerrilla forces, their leadership, and a peace established in the island, but an ongoing. I mean, all these conflicts. The resolution is still a process, and but let me read you a poem from a book called Uncivil War, and it's a sort of a history of Sri Lanka, history of this war. But it's not all melancholic, by the way. If you happen to pick up the book, you'll find some comic interludes. If you can, one has to laugh. Anyway, but this particular poem is a rather passionate poem about. Well, you'll hear it now. Fire Department. Where is your village? Burning. Where is your village? Mind feels. Where is your village? Blasted in crossfire, wounded under jungle trees. Where is your village? Running across marshes, shot in the back. Where is your village? Waving white flags, frisked, registered, supervised in a camp. Where is your village? Blowing up army friskers, other villages. Where is your village? Toronto, Berlin, Tamil Nadu. Where is your village? Madagascar as option has not been discussed. Where is your village? Hasta la vista, Special Envoy. Where is your village? Burning. As in all wars, they result in refugees and expulsions and communities living abroad. And let me read two more poems from this book. Tamil Resurrection. I'm standing outside, don't know how to get in. I'm standing outside, sun burning my skin. I'm standing outside till evening drops, night falls, don't know how to make night rise or evening take flight. I write 4-beat blues, shuffle in my shoes. I am free deliciously to sing up the tree. I will land in Heathrow or via satellite on the moon and beyond. I am irresponsible, a Tamil, a dreamer, a boy. I am alive still and will not die off like a tune. I will sing for my supper and school. I wear the colors in case I run into another fool who lives by old rules. I believe in marbles and tuck shops, spicy fish. I'm English, Tamil and Welsh. For the bards, I'm your friend in chapter and verse, a poet who cannot be shut off like a spout. I am groundwater, and my source is deep, hidden. No hound dog or metal detector can sniff me out. I promise not to explode, but hear my song. Give me a deed to the land where I am buried. Yeah, that land where I'm buried. The island, the paradise turned bloodied. And a poem quite contemporary, I suppose, but in this case, at the time that I wrote it, I mentioned these particular migrants, ready to move. We are Mayans, we are Tamils, we are Armenians, we are Germans who lived once in Poland, we are Burkinabes stuck in Abidjan, Somalians in Maine and Massachusetts. We are witnesses to the only truth worth repeating. Have a bag of essentials, holy book, toothbrush, a fresh set of clothes ready to put on your back when historical conditions change suddenly. I write in Spanish and French, other languages, but books published in quite a few in Spanish, actually. It's an interesting sort of disguise to write outside of. Let me recite one of these poems from Ventana Azul, which is my latest book in Spanish, published in Mexico. Ilusión. It's, well, you'll hear it. Detrás de la estación de Repsol, caminamos hacia el parque, donde con nuestras manos entrelazadas nos enamoramos. Y de esa primera tarde la estación se volvió la pierna y el encuentro de un amor hecho de caminatas hacia múltiples espacios verdes de esta ciudad brumosa, construida al lado de aguas friolentas y de estaciones de combustible. Un amor moderno que dependía del transporte público y privado para dejarnos cerca de la Alameda, donde en otra ciudad de América un hombre solía pasear con su armadillo. Eres el mar, el árbol, el camino de piedras, el olor a gasolina. Soy el feligrés, el explorador, el representante de países lejanos, donde otros amores se nacen en sus propios parques, al lado de las aguas que rodean a todos, aun en medio del desierto, como aquel de Paracas. Dejo mi cargo, entro al mar, dejas tus arrecifes de coral y tus formaciones rocosas, donde se han hundido los barcos para abrumar la costa. 35,000 hombres fueron borrados de la costa srilankesa ese día del tsunami. Déjame ser uno más. Let me finish with, let me see. Give me a second. I'll just read I'm not sure. I lost track of time, but I probably have time for a couple more poems. This one, a recent poem called After Disaster, a Lyric. Keep it small, tight, turned on a point. Don't let the blatherman sell you land, or the dame in a clown suit shoot, then walk calmly away into a sedan. The latter a news report. I am writing from all available material, trying to understand furies, modernize, the reasons why we threaten cutting off a head, or sending the beloved to Coventry, or screaming hurtful words after drink. Where does violence spring? Why not meditate, make love, drink wine, but just to the point, not beyond, where winds howl, swirling, and earth drops void? Preacher at the top. The volcano is quiet. Goats graze on its flanks. Birds fly overhead without turning heads, and little by little over years, communities have begun rearing up the hillsides, seeding corn and pepper, pitching tents, which become concrete slabs, 1- and 2-story residences, groceries, schoolrooms, lottery vendors, a city on the hill, a miracle of human industry, while the volcano sleeps and sleeps. Let us discuss everything tomorrow, the sinkhole, the smell of sulfur, the upward thrust of the bands. Go to sleep, night, night, in God's hands. I was just in Kentucky dropping my son off for a stay there in near a place called Gilbertsville, and I wrote this poem called Damned, D-A-M-N-E-D, Damned. Land between the lakes, apples, peaches, honeysuckle, oak and elm trees, magnolia blossom, walking in woods down to the water, good neighbors, antique shops, displaying curios from 10,000 cupboards and sitting rooms vanished in the mist, like Birmingham, Kentucky, and Johnsonville, Tennessee, buried by the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Kentucky Dam, progress, a look back at old photographs, a feed store, a church, a dozen drowned houses. There seems to be a watery theme through my reading this evening. And you know, Richard Wilbur passed away this week, and a very fine poet, and he lived to 96. In any case, I wrote a poem called Native Wilbur. If you knew Wilbur or did not, you can still write the poem. The denouement of petals soaring into landing pads, the smelt of mulch and plop of a tadpole in the stream are sounds made for Wilbur's to note, and those who would wear his cloak, wrapped in early morning cold, walking beyond the cottage into New England woods. A Mohegan or Nipmuc waits, an arrow, a quiver, and a basket, roots and grains. Shall we kill each other or share a meal? In poems we can describe the choice. Choose, live again, raise Wilbur from the shadows to make beauty and grace these words. And I'll finish with this poem. Again, I've lost track of time, so if I give me an idea, do I have time for another poem? Okay. I'll finish with this, also a recent poem called, called Refueling. I need to assess my body, read and listen to signs, exhausted in the afternoon, gulping for air in short breaths, against the backdrop of a new lease at hand, owning the house now, returned to familiar bed and books, the room where Dad read poems and drank scotch, to onions and chilies remembered in walls of the kitchen downstairs, Mother about to return from a sojourn west, and I the son who must now take care of the vessel, her blood flowing, my own operation of the sluice gates, so the ship can dip and rise and get out again into the deep, laden with provisions to feed new mouths waiting on the dock. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Seems like a very quick evening, I have to say. But please, let's give a hand to Indran, Nancy, and Rocky. Sorry, it's been a lovely evening. Truly, these different voices. Yeah, again, I really, I was just looking through this program. I really want to call your attention to, in the back of your program, things that are going on here. And these are all, they don't cost any money, and you may find things that intrigue you. And I do want to remind everyone that we have a poetry reading of the third Thursday, November 16th. Ralph Bridgman, Grace Cavalieri, and Richard Lohr, Richard is here? There he is. So Richard will be reading along with Grace and Randolph. we are going to have a little reception here, so it would be very nice if we all gathered out there and you can speak to the poets and to each other. And I thank you for coming. It's been very, and look on YouTube when? About another week or 2 weeks? Right. I'll send out a message on Facebook, on the Dryad Press Facebook page. Okay, thank you.